All comedy is about failure, frustration, disaster. I don't know why, don't ask me. You have to play failures to get laughs.
On the face of it, Ever-Decreasing Circles was a classic suburban sitcom, yet central to its everyday situations were some odd and unusual characters, none more so than the obsessive and insufferable Martin Bryce.
What is the matter with you?
The number of letters I got from people saying, he reminds me of my husband. And people were very, very fond of Martin.
He's just the most marvellous comedian, Richard. I mean, sometimes when we were recording the scenes or filming the scenes, he would do something that would make me laugh so much we'd have to stop filming.
And what's more, I didn't feel you kiss me goodnight.
Ever-Decreasing Circles ran for 27 episodes between 1984 and 1989. After a slow start, 12 million viewers were eventually inviting the dysfunctional Martin Bryce into their living rooms, as they had a decade earlier with Tom Good in The Good Life. The modern master of tragic comedy failure, Ricky Gervais, includes Ever-Decreasing Circles high up on his best ever comedy list, describing Richard Briers as the greatest living British sitcom actor. And, given a choice between Martin and Tom, for Richard, there'd be no contest.
My favourite would be Martin Bryce and Ever-Decreasing, rather than Tom Good, because, it was a wonderful character to play Tom, but it was very much me, as it were, slightly exaggerated, whereas Martin Bryce was a genuine character, and they'd written much more of a character.
They were John Esmond and Bob Larby, who had created perennial BBC favourite The Good Life, starring Richard Briers in 1975. By that time, Briers had already made a name for himself in television comedy. Our story starts back in the 50s, with Richard a humble filing clerk with a keen interest in theatre and amateur dramatics. His life changed when he auditioned for RADA on the advice of a famous relative.
You know, I know a friend who arrived here in Paris. 2 hours later, the door opened of his suite. His wife dashed in and said, "Hello, darling. Surprise, surprise."
Gosh, how super.
Super. It was disastrous. Caught him with his trousers down, literally.
My father's cousin was Terry Thomas, huge star, and Terry said,
"Please, I think you've got something. I don't quite know what it is, but I think you need sort of a polish, a kind of college or school."
From alongside Albert Finney, Alan Bates and Peter O'Toole at RADA, his first TV break came in 1961, courtesy of Dennis Norden and Frank Muir, then TV's most successful writers, who were looking for a young actor to join June Whitfield in a new series they were writing for Jimmy Edwards.
I don't think I can take this life much longer, Sally. Have you seen some of the jobs he's put me on this last fortnight?
I know. That pickup he handed you after the international rugger match.
6 drunken Irishmen in one small cab.
And that led the boys to have faith enough in me to give me a chance of my own series. So before I knew where I was, I think I was only about 27, I got my own television show, which is marvellous.
So impressed were Muir and Norden, the following year they wrote a sitcom that was the perfect starring vehicle for Richard. As a young, naive barrister in Brothers-in-Law, he played opposite more experienced Richard Waring.
Sounds a solid enough citizen. Why in the name of justice should he endanger his client's case by entrusting it to the likes of you?
Well, as a solicitor, he may have been impressed by my performance last time I was in court.
You've only been in court once, and that performance wouldn't have impressed your own mother. Here, A.K. Butterworth wouldn't be your mother.
No, he isn't. He's my uncle.
Through Brothers-in-Law, I met Richard Waring, who was a writer, but an actor-writer, and he didn't want to go on acting. He found it embarrassing, indeed it can be. And he was a good writer of his genre. I mean, he wrote light comedy stuff. And he thought this idea up of a young couple and all the vicissitudes and problems and ups and downs of a young, very young couple getting married.
George?
I'd just like to get something straight.
Oh, George, you're so funny to me.
As the one who makes the decisions, I can do what I want, so please, darling, please, I just want to think for a moment. I suggested the pictures, right? But you didn't want to go, so we're not going.
I did want to
So
go.
you didn't really want to, your own words, and we're not going, so we're doing what you wanted.
Well, it's just the way things turned out.
Prunella Scales co-starred, and Richard could demonstrate his trademark rapid-fire delivery.
The pictures, we'd have gone to your mother's, but I did suggest the pictures, so presumably I wanted to go. But we're not going to the pictures, which is what you wanted.
Darling!
Because I suggested the pictures, which I wanted, but you didn't. We're going to your mother's tomorrow, which you wanted, but I didn't.
Now listen.
We're not going to the King's Head, which I wanted.
The King's Head, you wanted to go to the pictures.
We're not going there either.
That got us very well known. And that series ran the longest running series I've ever had. We ran for over 40 episodes, which is very long then.
While Richard was making a name for himself in Marriage Lines, promising young writers John Esmond and Bob Larby also met Richard Waring, wearing his comedy executive hat. He commissioned a pilot which became their first sitcom series, Room at the Bottom. That led to a meeting in 1968 with Frank Muir, who, by now, was London Weekend Television's head of comedy. He commissioned Please Sir, Esmond and Larby's first big hit.
How are we going to balance their survival against the increasing rate of civilization?
No, I don't know the answer to that. What is it, Chief?
Well, I don't know. I'm asking you.
Oh, well, leave it with me. I'll have a think.
It was because of that the BBC probably thought, yeah, I wonder if they could do anything for us that was any good. When they called us up, said, we're looking for a series for Richard Bryars, who we never worked with, but who we obviously knew about.
After Marriage Lines, Richard polished up his talents in both the theatre and films, such as Fathom with Raquel Welch. He'd starred in the short-lived sitcom Birds on the Wing, when the BBC put him together with Esmond and Larby, TV's current flavour of the month.
Esmond and Larby were from heaven, as far as I was concerned. I met them, we collided, as it were, in our careers at their absolute peak. And I was getting, by that time, nearly reaching a peak.
Do you know what my biggest regret is?
It seems surprising now that Richard considered turning down the role that would make him a household name. But he was torn between his love of theatre and the financial rewards that TV success could bring.
In a funny sort of way. I, too, am very happy.
I wondered whether I should do The Good Life. You know, it's a very funny thing about actors, especially when you're young. You get very pretentious when you're young. You think, well, should I do Shakespeare? Should I go to the RSC and starve?
Go in peace, good general, but tell thy sovereign lady this. If she doth bite her thumbs at us, e'en do we back unto her our thumbs. Be back.
Don't call us, we'll call you.
And I thought, well, it could be rather good. And by golly, it turned out to be a smash-a-rooney.
Like Richard, his Good Life co-stars Felicity Kendall, Penelope Keith and Paul Eddington had strong theatre roots and had all been regulars in Alan Ayckbourn's West End plays. Their stage comedy experience meant a level of comic acting unusual in sitcom at that time, but perfectly suited to Esmond and Larby's writing.
Shall we ask Tom and Barbara?
Good idea. Care for a lunchtime drink, you two?
Let's have a super little pub. Right, lovely.
Smashing. Good. Come on.
All right, we'll come in our own car.
Look, you don't know the way.
OK, we'll follow you.
I still haven't seen this new car of theirs, Jerry.
Haven't you, darling?
Oh, my God! Drive on.
But they don't know the way to the pub.
I know. Drive on.
To the audience, Tom Good was a lovable eccentric, but Richard Bryars saw the character in a different light.
I'm not a great fan of Tom Good as a character. He was selfish. He was always on the touch with Margot and Jerry, always, you know, eating their food, drinking their drink. It was just him, my big idea.
They're not like us, Margot. They mustn't touch or they'll go bad.
Most of the parts I played aren't that likeable, which is very odd because, I've made a living by being likeable.
After the success of The Good Life, the cast were all rewarded with their own sitcoms. Carla Lane wrote Solo for Felicity Kendall. Penelope Keith scored a major success as Audrey Forbes Hamilton in To the Manor Born. And Paul Eddington's politician Jim Hacker bumbled memorably in Yes, Minister. Esmond and Larby also enjoyed phenomenal success on ITV with Get Some In, a sitcom about national service which gave Robert Lindsay an early starring role. So, expectations were high for their next project with Richard Bryars, the other one in 1977. Richard was paired with Michael Gambon, another stage actor and Alan Ayckbourn regular who was relatively new to television.
He played the most boring man in the world, and I played the most bumptious, pushy, ghastly man in the world. And it was beautifully written by Esmond and Larby, and it became our favourite. But it was a flop.
Buenas noches.
Sit down, Brian, old man, sit down.
Pa, ya si de esos extranjeros en nuestra casa.
The other one was a glorious failure. Richard wasn't very lovable. And the first time we did it in the studio, you could actually feel the studio audience recoil when Richard came forward with a moustache and a sort of smarmy kind of look about him. I was like, and the look said, no, that's not how Richard